I read last night her book, Everyday Grace, which is a New York Times bestseller and a great book. And she's written a dozen books, so there's a lot of great stuff out there.
That's an old one, actually.
But it's a beautiful one. I picked this book because we have an entire shelf of Marianne's titles, and this one, for whatever reason, it just kind of, spoke to me. So here we are. Why don't we just go through different parts that I've marked and talk about them.
Great.
Cool. So actually, why don't we start with one thing? I notice that you mentioned God a lot.
Yes, I do.
And that's cool. And obviously there are a lot of ways to interpret God, but you always use the masculine.
Yes.
I'm wondering, why is that?
Well, I actually wrote a book called A Woman's Worth, and it's all about the goddess.
Mm-hmm.
But I write primarily and lecture primarily based on the principles of A Course in Miracles. Now, there's one truth with a capital T, and it's spoken many different ways, different religious and spiritual philosophies, and also in secular terms. I do believe that, and they're all just kaleidoscopic expressions of universal spiritual themes. But as someone who does write and lecture on the Course, that is the language of the Course, the traditional Judeo-Christian God is He.
Sure.
And also, I am Jewish, raised Jewish, God was He, never was a problem for me. I appreciate that it's a problem for some people, and they should by all means use the language that works for them.
Okay, so it's cool to go with whatever you want.
Whatever. Nobody up there is going, oh my God, get the words right.
Okay, so you didn't mind, because Alanis Morissette, I believe, played God in the film Dogma.
Uh-huh.
And as a woman, I think they thought that was kind of cute. So it's legit. Anything is legit, basically.
As the Course in Miracles says, words are at best but symbols. Now, I will say this, as far as God being He, in the Eastern religions, there's the yin and the yang. And yin is the feminine earth principle, and yang is the masculine sky or spirit principle. Now, we call Mother Earth, we call Earth feminine all the time, Mother Earth. I never hear a man say, why do we call it Mother Earth? Why don't we call it Father Mother Earth? It's because instinctively we relate to the forces of the earth as feminine. So it's kind of like a male and female plug. It's not a genital issue.
Sure.
But it is a profound sense that the masculine enters into the feminine. Now, in the sense that God is masculine, God is He, humanity is she. And the idea of God entering into your heart, which is the mystical Christic perspective here, which is the idea that you are penetrated by God. God impregnates you, and that out of your humanity, which is the feminine, and the spirit that has entered into you, which is the masculine, there is born the Christ, which is neither masculine nor feminine. So there are ways in which there is a beautiful interplay spiritually of masculine and feminine, as long as we keep it out of our anthropomorphic, genital-based filters.
It's a great answer.
Well, thank you, Etan.
I'm sure you've said that before.
I could do this for a living.
I like it. Cool. But I love it. This I thought was very interesting. And obviously, A Course in Miracles talks a lot about love and fear and it being powerful drivers.
The drivers.
That's right. And here you've got there's a sentence that talks about how military power might actually try and take on terrorism, but only love has the power to dismantle the hate from which terrorism emerges. Could you explain that for a sec?
Well, of course, that book came out long before 9/11, but since 9/11 and since the emergence of ISIL and so forth, I have had a lot to say on the topic. First of all, if in the years previous to 9/11, I think if more people around the world had seen the American flag decal on schools and roads and hospitals and supporting what they knew to be genuinely democratic institutions, then I think that there might not have even been a 9/11. And
that'd be a very different world.
I agree. And even more currently relevant, there is no way to overestimate the part that the invasion of Iraq played in the creation of ISIL. So in terms of spirituality, we have atoning to do. I don't think that Germany would be as abundant and doing as well as it is doing today, socially and economically, had they not done full mea culpa, full atonement, including reparations after World War II for the Holocaust. Nations atone. The same spiritual principles that rule the transformation and the development of an individual apply to a nation, because a nation is just a group of individuals.
Sure.
So I don't expect Tony Blair or George Bush to get on TV anytime soon and atone.
Unfortunately not.
But I think that is work that we can do, because the energy that pervades a system when a critical mass of its population come to a new way of thinking cannot be overestimated. So first of all, the geopolitical, economic principles that rule our society are not based on love. They are based on
Power.
attaining short-term, basically economic gain.
Yeah.
That's where that power derives from, is economics. So short-term economic gain for huge multinational corporate forces.
Yeah.
As long as that is our bottom line, as opposed to genuine humanitarian concern, and for a real effort to assuage all the unnecessary human suffering on the planet. If you do apply karma, i.e. cause and effect, there's no surprise about what's going on in the world today. There was a spiritual cause, which, i.e. lack of love, to all of this, and only deep spiritual reflection and activism along the lines that I just said can make it right.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if we want to fight terrorism, we need to fight it with love.
Well, the only way you can fight it, the Course in Miracles says that there are two emotions, love and fear, and all negativity derives from fear. And the only way to replace fear is with love, just like the only way to replace darkness is with light. I think the first order of business in terms of ISIL and what's happening now is for us to really allow ourselves to take in the horror, the real horror of the stupid, immoral, unwarranted, absurd, and I think lie-ridden invasion of Iraq. This is why you and I were having a conversation earlier about buffering ourselves from our pain, and how so many people are seeking to numb, to take the edge off the pain of living in this world today. Because I think that...
Yeah, the news is full of all this madness, right?
If you're looking at the state of the world today and not grieving, you're not looking. But if you are not rejoicing in the miraculous possibilities of transformation, you're spiritually uninformed. Both are important. I saw in the news the other day, there was a bombing, an ISIL bombing.
And ISIL is ISIS as well. We
ISIL,
call it both
ISIL.
Here. Usually ISIS, but yes, Americans
Daesh,
like
maybe you
ISIL,
call it.
sure.
A
That's right.
bombing in a smaller town, not Baghdad, in Iraq, at the end of a soccer game. And it was a teenagers were playing the soccer game, and out of the 34 people killed, 17 of them were between the age of 10 and 16. And there was a picture that accompanied the article of this young man, he looked in his 20s or 30s, holding his arms around and comforting what seemed to be a teenage boy. And the shattered look, the heartbroken look on the face of this boy, who had just attended a soccer game that in Iraq today, this is probably one of the few pleasures that young people can still have. And I was agonized seeing this, and I was agonized at the thought that my country perpetrated an act which caused all this. And I thought about Gandhi's principle of soul force, satyagraha, to bear witness to the agony of others, and I thought, I would not want to buffer myself from the pain that I felt looking at that picture when that boy cannot buffer himself from his pain.
Sure.
And that is an important issue today. I hear people say, even around all this faux spirituality that has taken hold in too many quarters, and I see people like yourself as important because you're gatekeepers. You really do vet some of that.
Sure.
And that's part of the function, I'm sure, that you feel. And, I hear people, well, I'm just too empathic, I can't read that. I'm too sensitive. Excuse me?
Right, we need to be engaged.
We're all empathic, we're all sensitives, and we're
part of the world.
Sometimes you cry. In the Course in Miracles it says, look at the crucifixion, but do not dwell on it. The crucifixion being the energy pattern by which fear and ego mind in its destructive rampage would seek to invalidate love. You don't want to dwell on it, because then you do become just cynical and hardened.
Sure, obviously, yeah.
But
that's no
if
good.
you don't engage it at all, then you're in denial.
Denial,
You're not in
right.
transcendence.
Absolutely.
So I think that issue of our not buffering ourselves from the pain of what is happening on the planet, to me, it's a big topic, and it's why in my new book I've written about it.
This is Tears for...
Tears to Triumph,
to Triumph,
the spiritual journey from suffering to
which
enlightenment.
will be coming out in 2 months, which
June.
we'll talk about a bit more. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. And obviously, look, everybody agrees now that Iraq is destabilized, right? The invasion there, the Middle East, and the situation in Syria is horrendous because of it. And obviously what we still need to deal. We have to have some security, so if some power is still needed, but to try and find ways to create more understanding and transcend and try and communicate with each other and create love. It's a tough thing to do sometimes when somebody like what happened in Belgium just 2 weeks ago. So how do you do that? How do you try and get people to stop hating you?
Well, I think we have to go back. You have to go back to cause.
Okay.
And you said at the beginning, just of what you said, I mean, we know now, it's acknowledged that it was a mistake to invade Iraq.
Yes.
We need to go way deeper than we acknowledge that it was a mistake. That's the point. I acknowledge that it was keeps it above my neck,
Yeah.
keeps it in abstraction, to really allow ourselves to feel the horror of it, leads to something bigger than acknowledging it was a mistake. Spiritual principle does not, quote unquote, acknowledge a mistake. Spiritual principle is Catholic confession. Spiritual principle is Jewish Yom Kippur. Spiritual principle is how in Alcoholics Anonymous you admit the exact nature of your character defects. You take a fearless moral inventory, and you are willing to make amends. Spiritual principle calls for something much less copacetic and ultimately superficial than just admitting we made a mistake. To really allow yourself to experience the horror, and takes you to God in a different way. God shall not be mocked means he isn't. Your conversation with God is not some corporate conversation.
Sure.
It is the conversation from your soul. And when enough of us, I think that's the first thing for these nations such as Britain and the United States to do, is enough of us, enough of the citizens of these nations moving into a full atonement
Yeah.
for the...
So it's a different voice as a nation.
It is a different voice. It is a different strata of consciousness.
Yeah.
That's number one. Number two, I think that when it comes to the threats that are obviously existing, London, done Paris, have done Brussels, done New York once, but in terms of ISIL, I mean, clearly London, let's not kid ourselves, those of us who are spiritually oriented should be the biggest grown-ups in a society. We're the last ones who should be sitting out those conversations about what to do. Because if you know what transforms one life, you're the one who knows what would transform the world. I think massive prayer, massive meditation. Now, when I spoke in London recently, we talked, clearly there are a lot of meditation groups in London, and I'm sure that there are a lot of meditation groups specifically around the issue of terrorism and protection. But they've done a lot of interesting studies on synchronized prayer, synchronized meditation. What I suggested, and maybe you would have something, some involvement here, I don't know, I would recommend, maybe someone already has, you would do well to have who's going to commit to meditation between midnight and 1, another group, meditation between 1 and 2, another meditation between 2 and 3, over a 24-hour cycle.
So sort of taking shifts to guard.
Absolutely, including visualization, protection, and blessing, everything from your parliament buildings to your palaces and so forth. All the things that we just know some people would just love to hit for the emotional damage and fear that it would promulgate. So the studies are there. I mean, these things are scientifically substantiated. And then the third is to really give our lives over to the creation of a compelling future. The faith itself is an aspect of consciousness. Right now the problem is we have too much faith in the power of terrorism to hurt us, and not enough faith in our own cosmic power to override. And my sense as someone who's been out there a long time and is that we have reached a place in terms of the collective seeking of a generation of Westerners, certainly, where we're doing pretty good. I just think we need to step it up now. A lot of people who read your books already know what to do, but aren't necessarily doing it. A lot of people know they should meditate in art. A lot of people are meditating, but maybe not as long as they might. A lot of people know they should forgive, and are kind of, sort of. The thing is, if you think of a terrorist, I've never even, I can't even conceive of a kind of, sort of, casually, when it's convenient, committed terrorist. These people are deeply committed.
Yeah.
They have proved in horrifying ways that they will do whatever it takes to effectuate their worldview. The problem is not that hatred is more powerful than love, quite the opposite. The problem isn't that more people on the planet hate than love, quite the opposite. The problem is that those who hate with a conviction that is not yet demonstrated on behalf of love, and conviction is a force multiplier.
So if we have more conviction on the
behind love,
side,
and you and I had a conversation earlier today where there was this thing about enlightenment. I said, I don't see compassion, I don't see forgiveness, I don't see love. The ego is very insidious. Until we become as convicted and committed to being vessels of love as some people are to being vessels of hate. And in our own lives, from a Course in Miracles perspective, each and every one of us has a highly individualized curriculum. The people who are already in our lives, the situations and the circumstances already in our lives, are we showing up fully? Like when you said to me today, just relax, you're here. I wasn't quite here.
That's right, you were all over the place.
That's right.
Well, it's cool. Yeah, being present. That's
and
where
being
it
present
starts.
for what you can give. I would have definitely been here for the interview, but
I'm sure, no doubt of it. Absolutely. This was interesting. You mentioned the ego just a second ago, and you've got you mentioned here a pseudo-Buddhist graffiti that read, "Don't just do something, sit there," and it's the ego always wants us to do something, and it's important to know also how to kind of sit down and, as you say here, quietly seek the peace of God. So I should mention, by the way, I actually had an art project that I made about a decade ago, and I created this installation where you would walk into a space, and there was both audio, there was some sort of Buddhist monk that was chanting, and there was a really soothing visual that you would get. But there was a microphone and a webcam that if you moved or made noise, it would all fade away, disappear. Wow. And the idea was to have people come. I called it Zen aesthetic, and the idea was that to experience it, you have to actually do nothing. Otherwise, you'd really lose it.
That's great. Did you do it?
And I did it. I built it, and and I did it. It was part of my master's degree, it was a cool project. But
that's very cool.
But yes, so often we forget that that knowing how to not do is an action.
Well, living in the modern world, we are constantly barraged. We are bombarded by a clutter of ultimately meaningless stimulus.
Yeah.
And that's day in and day out. And our ancestors didn't have to deal with that. The human brain, literally, is not set for that. When you do physical exercise, you are training your physical muscles so that you can move.
Yep.
When you do spiritual exercise, you are training your internal attitudinal muscles so that you can remain motionless and non-reactive. A problem that people have today, people have no impulse control. The whole world has shpokas, as we would say, right?
Yes.
And so what's happening is the nervous system is like a crystal vase. Too much water is coming in, and everybody's face is shattered. Everybody's nervous system is shattered. And that's what meditation does. And that's why the ego is always about, sometimes you go into a really nice restaurant, right? And it's so loud, you can't even hear the other person.
Sure.
And that's what's called a cool restaurant.
Yeah.
Is one in which what? What did you say? So a lot of the spiritual reclamation of the soul has to do with that cultivation of a quiet mind, a quiet environment. There is in both Judaism and in Christianity an expression, the small, still voice for God. The ego speaks first. The ego speaks loudest.
Yep.
And meditation gives us the capacity to hear the small, still voice that will not impose itself on you, but is there. And through meditation and through prayer and through serious spiritual practice, we become finely tuned intuitional instruments, because we can hear. It's a radio link that everybody has, but in the world today there's so much static you can't hear it. And that's why the cultivation of a quiet mind is everything, as you obviously know.
And you mentioned as part of your morning ritual, even though you do read the news, you always make sure to have time to meditate every morning, so you have a chance to have that stillness. And
well, if you look at it, we wake up in the morning, you take a shower, you take a bath, you don't want to take yesterday's dirt into the day.
Yep.
But if you don't meditate and you don't pray, then you're taking yesterday's stress.
Yep.
And in today's world, you're taking the stress of everybody in Greece and Turkey and Syria, and the stress of everybody in Iraq and Afghanistan, and Pakistan and every place else. So this idea of allowing ourselves to receive the light, not only to give us peace, but there's something bigger going on. It's so that then when you are going back into the darkness of the world, you yourself can be a transformer. You can bring your peace with you. So you don't just receive the miracle, you go out to work miracles.
Sure.
Miracles being that shift in your own perception, from being at the effect of the fear of the world to being at the cause through a love that casts.
Hey, I mean, you mentioned in the book that if you're constantly stressed, you're not really alive.
And you're certainly not of help to others.
Definitely not.
And that's really the name of the game today, the of help to others part.
I agree completely. Let's see, some other really cool things. Well, this goes back to what we're talking about meditating in the morning. You mentioned here that we shouldn't really turn down a chance to meet with God, and that's what meditation is.
I tell people all the time that, if you go to the doctor and the doctor just comes in and leaves the room too fast, you're sitting here thinking, well, he or she didn't really hear, I needed to tell them about my symptoms. They didn't really hear the whole story. They came in and rushed in and out too fast. That's how we are with God. I always have this amusing image in my mind of God sitting at a desk going like this. It's like you can have a meeting. I remember there was a song on the album Songs in the Key of Life by Stevie Wonder, and he said God is the only free psychiatrist known throughout the world to every boy and girl. How can you turn down? It's like, if you think about it, you can have on any given day a free meeting with God for however long you want. And we're like, no, I'm too busy. I gotta go. I gotta pick up the That's really what we're talking about here.
That's true. So yeah, people should take advantage of that opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I mean, or not.
It's up to them. But actually, because you mentioned like we shouldn't feel like we should be able to ask whatever we want and feel that it's okay to pray, and never think it's too selfish, right? You mentioned we shouldn't feel that it's too selfish to pray, but can't it be sometimes selfish?
Well,
obviously some things can be, right?
I think that what we want to move away from is seeing God as your errand boy.
Okay.
Getting what you want. People talk today as though there's something spiritual about just figure out what you want and go for it. Hitler figured out what he wanted and went for it.
Yeah.
ISIL figured out what they wanted and they're going for it. That's not the high spiritual mountaintop, to have a vision of what you want and go for it.
Yeah.
That's number one. The second has to do with the difference between what the Course in Miracles calls magic and miracles. Magic is what a lot of people are doing these days. Basically, you use universal principle as your errand boy. You have a to-do list, and you give it to the universe. I want this, and I want this, and I want this, and I want this. And if I concentrate on it and visualize it and all that, I can make it happen, which you probably can.
Sure.
Once again, but let's not pretend that's the high spiritual mountaintop. The high spiritual mountaintop is not where you ask the universe for what you want. The high spiritual mountaintop is where you place yourself in service to the universe. Not what can I get, but what can I
So how do you
give?
do that? Because
Well,
it's easy.
hold on one
It's easy
second.
to
One
do
second.
the other side.
I think it's almost the opposite, but hold on.
Great.
The idea, I was with some friends the other day. Marianne, what do you want? I said, can't think of anything I want right now. I got so much pushback. People were actually uncomfortable with that. Well, there must be something that you want. there's nothing I want right now. I mean, I'm so thrilled with what is
Great.
and what I have.
Being content
But the
is the best ever.
pushback. Now, the ego mind, it's the ego, the fear-based ego, which has this core belief that you don't have enough.
Right.
And so your requests for what you want are based on a core belief that you lack. So then no matter what you get, your core belief is still that you lack, so you will just subconsciously recreate more lack. So it's not that you are selfish, because in the spiritual world it's a win-win. But it is the realization that on a spiritual plane, I only get to keep what I give away. So if you live, and this is where lines like seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and all else will be added unto you. Kingdom of heaven is an awareness with oneness, of our oneness. So from a metaphysical perspective, if I seek to be fully in the present, to be there as an instrument of excellence and love, everything that could possibly contribute to my happiness and ease and in doing so is already on the way.
Yeah.
It's already on the way. And it's just pick it up because it's right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so it's a different
agree.
mindset.
But then how do you put yourself in service?
Well, I'm a Course in Miracles student. The Course doesn't claim any monopoly on truth. There's one truth with a capital T spoken in many different ways. The Course, one of the things that's very powerful for those of us who do feel moved to read the Course, is that the second book is a workbook. It's the crux of the Course, is that actual attitudinal, psychological mind training in releasing one thought system based on fear and replacing it with a thought system based on love. So, for instance, in the Course in Miracles, there's a prayer. It says, every day ask, where would you have me go? What would you have me do? What would you have me say? And to whom? And so it's a path of forgiveness more than anything else, a radical path of forgiveness. But it says no decisions are to be made for ourselves. We are to ask. You and I are a perfect example. I'm busy this week in London. And I hadn't gotten back to you, but something in me said, show up for that. Now notice even then today, because I was still in that, like, I don't have time for this mode, right?
Yeah.
But my internal guidance was to, and then once I was reminded, we're not perfect masters, but you just keep going it, and you with it, and you seek to live that way. So when I put today on Facebook, my post was, every day, dedicate your life to God. You don't necessarily say this, but think it. I said it will put you in Shakti receptor mode all day. Because when you say, God used me today, it aligns you with the vertical and gives you power in the horizontal. It is an instruction to your subconscious mind. All of the input which would foster my strength and my attracting all things positive, that's what I want to notice. May everything else, may that not be where my mind goes. In the Jewish Star of David and in the Christian cross, you have visual symbols of the intersection between the vertical and the horizontal. And we're all, the ego mind, grasping for the horizontal. I want the house, I want the car, I want the money, I want the sex. When you just make your concentration the vertical. In the Course in Miracles it says, you are far too tolerant of mind wandering. Because we don't have trained attitudinal muscles.
True.
It says you achieve so little because you have undisciplined minds. And discipline and disciple come from that same word, root. So you make that your concentration.
Mentioned in the book here as well.
Yeah, and anything that can contribute to your happiness, which your ego mind can't possibly know what that would be.
Yeah, absolutely. So you being receptive, that's where it starts. And you can't do that when you're stressed, obviously.
And that alignment and that meditation. The thing I love about the Course in Miracles is that it is a particular sentence every day.
Yeah.
It's like a mantra. A lot of people, it's interesting because all meditation is relaxation, but not all relaxation is meditation. So there are a lot of people today who say they meditate, but when you actually ask their technique, it's more relaxation, which is lovely, relax, but meditation really changes the brainwave patterns. When you actually have a mantra and practice
That's a very
technique.
good point.
Yeah.
Very, very good point. And you do transcendental meditation as
I
well.
do TM and A Course in Miracles, but I'm more everyday discipline with the Course. Yeah.
Sure. I really like what you said also about how the mystic views any problem as a chance to use his or her magic wands. Could you expand on that a bit?
Well, look in the Old Testament, look at the staff of Moses. It's the same archetype. And God said, throw it down and turn it into a snake, which scared Moses. That's the power of the mind when it is out of your control. He said, pick it up, take control over it, and it turned into his staff. And it's fascinating, the metaphysics of the story of Exodus, because when he held the staff up, held his mind up, the Israelites won. And then there's that one scene in the Exodus where I can't remember which of the two men had to he was so tired, and they held up his arms. Yeah. Well, I don't know if it was Aaron or somebody else. He was just too tired. He held it up because when he held the staff down, the Israelites were defeated. That's the power of the mind. And that's the same archetype as Merlin's wand, or in the fairy tales, which are very metaphysical. The fairy godmother. She didn't. When the fairy godmother was with Cinderella, and Cinderella needed a dress for the ball, the fairy godmother didn't call Selfridges.
No. Or Saks Fifth Avenue.
Or Saks Fifth Avenue. She takes the wand and she puts light around the rags, and the rags turned into, which means you take the circumstances. God doesn't transform your life by changing your circumstances. He transforms your life by changing your view of the circumstances that you are already in. And then from there, either those circumstances are taken to a higher place, or if they are to be replaced and changed, they will be. But if you haven't transformed your view, then even if you change your circumstances, you'll recreate the same situation. So the idea of the wand is the idea of focused thought in a spiritual direction. Love, atonement, compassion, forgiveness.
And meanwhile, the idea that the problem is an opportunity is also an important
well, every
insight.
every situation in life is a platform for a miracle. And once you really get that every situation, bar none, is the individualized curriculum. My being here with you right now, this is it. How am I doing? So what's the lesson? Well, I'm trying my best to show up, trying my best to be present, I'm trying my best to be positive. This moment, this is it. I was with somebody one day, and I remember saying, oh my God, I totally get where you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to be doing. Do you want me to tell you? And she said, what? I said, you're supposed to be here. You're supposed to be with me. How do I know? Because you are.
Absolutely.
God's not somewhere else at some other time.
No, it's about being here. Actually, we've got a sentence here. Happiness is not what happens when everything goes the way you think it should go. Happiness is what happens when you decide to be happy.
A Course in Miracles says happiness is a decision we must make. It's interesting in the fairy tales, going back to the metaphysics of the fairy tales, when it says, and they lived happily ever after. That's not a bad message, that's a good message. They learned to think. Now that doesn't mean that, until we're total enlightened masters, even a happy life can have sad days.
Sure.
It's still a happy life. And you can, if you develop the attitudinal muscles, we tend to go through emotional and psychological crisis, the same way we go through everything else in life. So if you are a positive person, it's a mental musculature that serves you well during those times in the valley.
Well, that's where spiritual intelligence really comes into play,
That's
right?
Exactly right.
Yeah. Very powerful toolkit to have. Also, you talk interesting about judgment, how it can stop the flow of goodness, and how we have to be careful, not to. You mentioned here, no one else's good fortunes diminish our own, except when we denigrate it.
Mm-hmm. So the idea is that miracles occur naturally as expressions of love, and that every moment we make a choice. We make it consciously or unconsciously. Is my heart opened? Because if my heart is opened, the miraculous flow, the natural intelligence of the universe is expressing itself. If I withhold love through judgment, through attack, through blame, criticism, through negativity, I literally block the love. I literally deflect the miracle that would otherwise occur. In A Course in Miracles it says, you are like people in a very bright room, putting your fingers in front of your eyes, complaining that it's dark in here. So the idea is that miracles occur naturally, but when I in any way fail to use my mind to approve, to be charitable, to be compassionate, then I block it. Now, once you realize the concept of oneness, so on a physical level, you're over there and I'm over here, but the three-dimensional world, according to Buddha, according to the Course in Miracles, according to Einstein and others, is itself an illusion of consciousness.
Sure.
So on the level of ultimate reality, beyond the veil of this mortal world, there's no place where you stop and I start. So if I'm having a judgmental thought about you, in the Course in Miracles it says, imagine that a sword is dropping on your head, but actually it's dropping
It's
on
you.
mine.
Yeah.
So any judgment of you is a denial, because if I judge you, it is my way of saying you don't deserve blah, 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 which is my message to my own subconscious that is what I believe about myself, and therefore I will not let myself have those things. So my generosity towards you is an act of self-interest.
That's what Nietzsche would say, right?
Yeah, he would say that, actually. He said also, I quoted him in this book, he said something about how life is suffering and that to survive the suffering is to find meaning in it.
Yeah. Actually, this is interesting. Speaking of that and judging someone else, I had there was a part here in your book that you talked about what are you supposed to do? You say, should you forgive all the people that are trying to destroy the planet, and and how do you do that, and and how you can be angry, and then it's like, well, you're upset at the politicians you mentioned, and you'd like things to be different, but then you
Even
actually
more so than when I wrote that book.
I'm sure. But then you decide to feel that sadness, and try and find love for those people, and you turn it around to the point where actually at the end you say, wow, I'm busted because I'm also flawed to judge them, and it almost felt a little bit like Byron Katie's work, that little segment there. What do you think? I mean, I don't know. What do you think of the work?
I think she's a wonderful woman. This is the thing. Too many people then, for my taste, then take that to mean stay away from politics and stay away from activism because I don't want to judge them.
Yep.
And that's to me a real spiritual shadow,
Yep.
right, for a lot of people in our community. The issue is, as Martin Luther King said, you have no morally persuasive power with people who can feel your underlying contempt. So if I judge you, I'm not going to be able to try to persuade you of a moral argument.
Right.
So if I'm angry in my politics, I will only get applause from those who already agree with me.
Yep.
So where did I really serve the cause?
Well, so this is very interesting, because you ran.
Yeah, I did.
Was it governor?
No, I ran for Congress.
Congress. It was Congress. That's right.
I think we
exactly.
had that part down. I think that.
And
I'm pretty
I
clear.
think you took fourth or something.
I took fourth, but it was out of 16 people.
So, which is very respectable.
No, I didn't run a good quote unquote campaign, but I'd never run a political campaign before or been part of a political campaign before, and vastly underestimated how much that would impact my ability to do an effective job, no matter how much money I raised. So I fell down terribly on that score. But in terms of the message, in terms of the presentation of the message, in terms of the issues we were talking about, which are basically echoed by a Bernie Sanders campaign today,
Yep,
that's kind
yep.
of where we were, I think it was quite positive. And I'm satisfied with what it was.
So you're proud.
Yeah, I am very proud on that area. Yes, I'm clear where I got it wrong and where I got it right.
Hey,
but
okay.
the issue here,
it still had to run that course, basically.
well, everything in life apparently did, right?
Yeah.
Because we
Yeah.
would have done better if we had known. But my point about politics here is, there's a difference between telling truth to power and calling systems to account,
Yep.
and personally demonizing individuals.
Right.
That's where the spiritual issue is. Some people talk about being love, 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 and therefore don't take part in a passionate debate. I myself, because I'm a Bernie Sanders supporter, have talked about Hillary. People say, well, you're being so negative about Hillary. No, I'm not. I don't agree with her politics.
Right.
I can respect her as a woman.
It's okay to disagree.
Absolutely. And I think that there's really, we need to stop being so pink and gauzy in the spiritual community. Healthy debate. It's like in an intimate relationship. You have to be able to fight.
Absolutely.
You have to be
Otherwise, you're in denial.
Yeah. And so I think that's true in politics
engaging.
also. And it's also one more area where the spiritual community, higher consciousness community, we should be the biggest grown-ups. We should not allow ourselves to be so
often
infantilized.
it's so awful.
And we are sidelined for good reason, because we're not carrying the gravitas that we could.
I haven't seen this, but I heard someone asked Sanders what if he was religious or spiritual, and he said something about how he just wanted everybody to basically love one another. It was a beautiful response, rather than actually taking any particular religious path.
Although many of us would see his spiritual philosophical outlook, as he has said, as deeply rooted in his Judaism.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's good for the world to see that, I think.
I agree. And you mentioned Tikkun Olam also in the book, which is a very important Jewish concept for trying to make the world a better place. It's our responsibility.
Right, and that's where I think Bernie Sanders is coming from.
Yeah. This is early April that we're having this interview, and he's making a bit of a comeback. A lot remains to be seen what will happen, obviously, with the presidential race, but anything is still possible. But regardless, he's already made a huge impact, whatever happens.
Well, it's all mainstream media propaganda what he has done is extraordinary already.
I agree completely. You mentioned here, the more we pray, meditate, and take our spiritual practice seriously, the better listeners we become to the small, still voice of God, which we hit upon before. So, in order to be more receptive to the world, that's why it's so important to meditate or pray and to be able to listen, and that's how we become of service, right? That's the idea?
We all have a choice. You can play life deep or you can play life shallow.
Okay.
And if you play life shallow, you meet the world on a level of personality. And you are also heir, the Course in Miracles says you are heir to the laws that rule the level that you identify with. So if I only identify with the external world, I identify with a world of scarcity. And so I'm always trying to get, because I think there are only so many pieces of the pie.
Yep.
The more I ground myself in deep spiritual practice, that's more than sharegraphic spirituality. The deep practice of meditation and prayerfulness,
So seriousness really means something here.
Yeah, as a student of the Course in Miracles, I see so much light, spirituality light these days. And then there are the serious where you actually spend time in meditation, you actually spend time in prayer, you actually go through every day, okay, as the Course in Miracles says, only what you are not giving can be lacking in any situation. Where you actually go through, okay, what was my part in this, what was my part? The Course in Miracles says, you pay a very high price for not taking 100% responsibility for your own experience. The price is that you can then not change it. Real spiritual work is, okay, what was my part in this disaster? Real spiritual work is, who am I not forgiving? Real spiritual work is, where am I obsessed with the past or the future? The real spiritual work is, where am I not recognizing the spiritual principle that is involved here? The nitty-gritty dirt under the fingernails. The ego mind wants to monitor other people's processes. But we have a full-time job monitoring our own. Now, when you dwell on that level, if I'm dwelling deep in me, I see deep in you.
Yep.
And other people hear you at the level you speak from. So if I am dwelling deep within myself, I don't chit-chat with you. I go deep, and you go deep too, because that puts the energy there. It takes us both to that frequency where we're not trying to get.
Yeah.
We're trying to give.
Yeah.
Now, when you look in the body, every cell is infused with a natural intelligence.
Absolutely.
And that intelligence leads it to collaborate with other cells to serve the healthy functioning of the whole, the organ and the organism of which it's part. Every once in a while, a cell goes insane. And the cell disconnects and, for whatever reason, doesn't think that it's here to collaborate with other cells to serve the healthy functioning of the pancreas or the liver or the lungs or the bones. It says, no, I want to go do my own thing.
Yep.
I want to go do my own thing and build my own kingdom.
Yep.
It's called cancer.
Yeah.
It's cancer in the body. It is malignant in the body, and it is malignant in consciousness. That's the problem with the world. Human consciousness has been infected with a malignant consciousness, which says the highest good is that I get to do what I want.
But you still have to acknowledge individual creativity and the ability to kind of go and be
I don't think that the individual
no?
cell isn't self-actualized.
Interesting.
Quite the opposite. The cell being healthy and vital is what enables it to collaborate. So and you look here, let's say our interview right now.
Yep.
You are collaborating with me, I'm collaborating with you.
Absolutely.
It is to your highest good, given that you are the bookstore owner. It is, and all that you own and do here, it is to my highest good, and there's a way for me to express my work. And we are collaborating, so by you standing in your highest good and my standing in my higher good, we are actually creating something
Absolutely.
bigger that hopefully serves others.
100%. The world is not a zero-sum game.
And
That's for
you
sure.
hear, I don't know if you hear it here, but at home, you hear this all the time when people go into meetings. Okay, now what's our intention for this meeting? Which I find appalling.
Yeah.
Because it has turned
Not open.
It's transactional.
Yeah.
It's transactional rather than relational.
Yep.
So instead of saying to go, to be in a space of love and openness and possibility, it's what can I get from you?
Sure.
So programming my subconscious to
Awful.
try to manipulate you and exploit you to get what I want.
Yeah, you're right. And too many people live in that
So
in that plane.
service is natural.
Yeah.
When you are in, the Course in Miracles says, the closer you grow to God, the closer you grow to your natural ability to protect your brothers. When my daughter was like 4 years old, well, there were these 3 little girls. Actually, it was Ariana Tuffington's little girls, interestingly enough. My daughter, one of her daughters was born in May of 89. My daughter was born in May of 90, and the other one was May of 91. Maybe the Mays weren't right, but they were 89, 90, and 91. So they were playing a little child's board game. They were really young, like 4, 5, and 6, or 5, 6, and 7, whatever. And Ariana's littlest one won. And I said, oh, Isabella, that's so good, that's so great. So you get to take India, my daughter, you get to take her little whatever, and they're yours now because you won. And there was this look of horror on her face because she couldn't understand how her winning
Takes away.
was going to be take away things. She
Sure.
said, no, honey, you can have these. I said, no, honey, you won. So you get to have them now. And her little face, she couldn't even comprehend how taking from India was her win. It was so beautiful to see that innocence, that she had not been taught yet the thought system. She had not taken in yet the thought system
Yep.
that her win would be at the expense of someone else's. I
That
thought
is
I
beautiful.
never forgot
That's
that
beautiful.
story.
And I'm not sure that not all children have that. I think that
Well,
maybe instinctively they do, but
they do when
but,
you were
but
born.
very quickly they learn, unfortunately, to try and just take and take and take, right?
It's unbelievable
So-
what you see. I see some
Because knowing how to share and love, it's so important.
it's everything.
Yes.
It's not just so important.
Yes.
It's everything.
I agree. It's interesting, actually. I mean, a little bit of a tangent here, but I'm a big board game enthusiast, and there's been a renaissance of board games coming from Europe over the last 20 years, where unlike traditional games like Monopoly or Risk, where you literally have to kind of like, destroy your opponent to win, they've created games that they're still competitive, but they're called games of indirect. And the idea is usually you have to reach a goal before someone else does in order to win the game.
Wow.
And you're not necessarily taking away from someone else.
Right.
It's just whoever passes the finish line. But meanwhile, everybody else can do well in the game as well. And it's curiously enough, those games mostly come from Germany, and they say that a lot of that culturally might be because of the fact of they're
Kinda
changing
learn the
their
hard
culture
way.
and learning the hard way and really changing that. So
Fascinating.
I mean, Settlers of Catan is considered the most popular one at this point. But I
Interesting.
find that
Very
really
interesting.
really fascinating.
Well, it's the only way we'll survive as a species.
Gotta know how to share and how to collaborate. And actually, all these games are based in collaboration. So
And
you
that's
trade
what that
and you help each
cellular
other.
relationship is. It's collaboration. You see it in the body. But we've lost sight of it. We've taken rugged individualism too far.
By the way, you mentioned here that in A Course in Miracles, it's our job to tell someone they're right even when they're wrong, but that doesn't mean we're supposed to lie.
That's right.
We just have to find a way to affirm their humanity while still kind of giving them, our point of view.
That's been a very difficult one for me. People
Yes.
would say to me, "Oh, Marianne, you were so harsh when you said that." And I said, I wasn't harsh. It was the truth. It was just, I was being blunt.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody once said to me, the line, I don't know who originally said this, but it's really brilliant. Honesty without compassion is brutality.
Yes.
And communication has the word commune inside it.
Beautiful.
So if I don't take responsibility for the heart space between me and another person, then I might say, well, I communicated. You didn't communicate. You actually spoke in a way that broke communication because it
Yeah.
made the other person want to protect themselves. So that's, you can affirm and show respect for someone, and affirm your innocence. And, it's like when people say nonviolent communication, you don't say, you made me feel. You say, when
I
that
feel.
happened, I felt.
Yeah.
I always say the Holy Spirit works on your style. It's not just what we say, it's the energy with which we say it. And as I said before, the Course in Miracles says, people hear you on the level you speak from. And I've had some real sad things in my life where I know people took offense when that was the last thing I intended.
Sure.
And so that's working on that muscle is extremely.
I understand you've got From Tears to Triumph. You've got a new title coming out soon, and I'd love to kind of hear what it's about.
Thank you. It's called Tears to Triumph: The Spiritual Journey from Suffering to Enlightenment. There has developed in our culture a way that we take this cheap yellow smiley face and we pour it on everything like happy face. And it has given us a distrust of unhappiness. And just as there are storms in nature and they serve a function, there are storms in the normal life.
Sure.
People die, divorce, heartbreak, grief, financial loss, financial ruin, recovery, finding out someone you love is addicted, losing your job. And these can lead to very dark nights of the soul. And what I think of as a psychotherapeutic pharmacological industrial complex has kind of appropriated the word depression
That's
for
scary.
its own purposes over the last few years. And woe to the person who dares question that. Many depressing periods in life are, or certainly can validly be deemed, and certainly are in my mind, spiritual crises.
Mm-hmm.
Now people say, well, you're not a doctor. Well, I would say to some of them, but you're not how can I look to your mindset to heal a crisis of the soul if you don't even acknowledge that the soul exists?
Sure.
So I think many of us are not so quick to enroll. Now, I certainly believe that there are, in cases such as schizophrenia and bipolar,
There's room for
uses for psychotherapeutic drugs
yeah.
can be, absolutely. But there is an epidemic of casual antidepressant use today.
Yeah.
Somebody, particularly young people, going through the normal processes of sadness, deep sadness, even depression, that are part of growing up, that are not mental disorders,
Right.
that do not represent mental illness, and yet are told not only to take antidepressants, but to expect to remain on them for the rest of their lives.
This is where it gets scary. So you're saying it's one thing to maybe take antidepressants, if you're really depressed, but it's another thing to have a life sentence.
Well, it's not for me to say who should even take them at all. That's not the conversation, because that drags us into how dare you.
Okay.
I'm just saying that
It's
not
too much.
all depression is a mental illness.
Right.
I mean, people are so into, no, this person has been diagnosed as clinically depressed. The diagnosis is based on a survey.
Sure.
The diagnosis is based on a questionnaire, and when you look at those questionnaires, you look at those surveys, it's a spectrum. And who among us wouldn't say, yes, I was that at one time?
Sure. Everybody gets sad. Everybody
Right.
has. Yeah.
And people say, oh no, it's a chemical imbalance. But then when you really look into okay, even if it affects your chemistry, so does meditation.
Right.
Meditation affects your chemistry as well. And these days, there's this quick, some people say, well, that's a stigma on mental illness. It does not stigmatize mental illness to say that certain periods of depression are not a mental illness, and that we should not be we're pathologizing everything today. We pathologize adolescence. We call everything a disorder. If I hear one more person say they have an anxiety disorder, this whole civilization is an anxiety disorder.
That's true.
Unfettered global capitalism is insane.
Yeah.
The way we treat the planet today is insane.
Yep.
The way we have created that's another issue that I talk about in the book. We now know that you can't talk about the mental and emotional problems of a adolescent outside the context of the
course, the
entire family
environment, yeah.
system. And I think now we need to know that you can't really talk about individual
nation as well.
suffering outside the context of the
Sure.
social and political structures
As
that we're
above,
all
so
living
below.
within. You know, whether you're living in Baghdad or, you know, if you see somebody beheaded on your computer, you're sitting in Idaho, you're going to be depressed that day.
Yeah.
So I think that the issue is for us to realize that there is a level on which over the last 100 years we have taken the issue of human suffering and so made it about the individual
Interesting.
that this has kept us from recognizing some of the larger social forces that are depressing all of us.
Yep.
And that then keeps us from changing those
We
things.
need to be able to engage them.
Exactly. So I try to go into that, and then what I talk about is I go rather deeply into Buddha and Moses and Jesus, talking about how suffering is at the core. Until Buddha saw suffering for the first time after Siddhartha left his father's compound, it is when he saw age, suffering, and disease for the first time that he began his journey to enlightenment. His Four Noble Truths, the first one is life is suffering. It is when Moses saw the suffering of the Israelites and then led them through a period very replete with suffering in the desert. And of course, Jesus is suffering on the cross.
Yeah.
However, in all three cases, that's just the first half of the equation, because the whole point is what comes after when God shows his hand, which is enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, deliverance of the promised land, and resurrection.
Yep.
But in all three stories, human suffering,
It's an integral
it's
point.
right there.
Yeah.
So some of these more, secular and psychotherapeutic and soulless and even pharmaceutical perspectives on these dark nights of the soul do not recognize the deep spiritual gold in all the great religious and spiritual systems, because they all not only acknowledge suffering, but have a deeper conversation about suffering, a deeper understanding that it gives us about suffering, which then leads us to not just its denial or to buffering ourselves from it, but the genuine work of transcending it and overcoming.
I love
So
it.
I hope the book
I'm looking forard to
opens that
reading
conversation.
it.
Thank you.